Hello, everyone. Welcome at our Core Protocol Sync Monday. We'll share updates on the protocol from last week in a little bit more detail and plans for the next week. And Lucian, maybe you want to start?
Okay, sure. So let me share my screen. Okay. So is it visible?
Yes.
Great. So last week there is a kind of critical executor issue found on XNet, which is that the secondary chain can be higher than the primary chain due to an issue that on the primary chain startup, we fit in the leaves of the primary chain, which always include the best block. So we kind of process this best block multiple times unconditionally, so that we are causing the primary chain has more blocks than the actual primary chain. It's not like it didn't being catched earlier. I think it's probably because I often run the secondary nodes in kind of a fresh. Like I always start the secondary chain from Genesis or from zero, so it's not observed earlier. So yeah, the solution is that we are simply skipped if the leaves is not higher than the best block of the secondary chain, which has been processed already. So we just simply skipped those. Yes, comments, questions?
No, makes sense.
Okay.
Daria?
I just want to ask, maybe I'm just still out of context here, but what is a secondary chain?
Okay. This is the execution chain. We have the consensus chain and the execution chain, right? So the secondary chain is the execution chain.
Why?
Yeah, you just call them primary and secondary.
Yeah.
Why don't we call them execution chain?
That's a very good question. I have the whole document which has some more canonical terminology. I just didn't publish it yet. For now, we are calling it primary, secondary in the code base. In some places we call it differently, unfortunately. So we'll transition to some version eventually.
Okay. So let's merge the last week. There's a pending PR also from last week, but I would love to leave it to next time for the completeness.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Ivan, what about you?
Yeah, sure. Let me just share a screen. Yep, here it is. Hope you can see it. So basically, during last week, we finally integrated the DSN into the farmer. So that basically ended up in the some flag which would enable the DSN sync, which is kind of useless right now, but it will be used in future. Yeah, in a couple with some other things like to note. So yeah, basically we just enabled that using the handler for the networking. Yeah, right now we require one more handler in order to retrieve the pieces from the farmer. Yeah, so we just so basically we can get a request from the network but we need pieces from some certain piece index hash, do some piece index hash, and we need to retrieve them all. Yeah, we need to we will need to transition to some other API in future. So for example, like asking like from some piece index hash some certain amount of pieces. Yeah, that would be really handy in future. Yeah, but mostly it didn't cover like a hell lot of invariants. Yeah, which I was thinking about, which I didn't think about. Yeah, which I actually caught in the integration test. We decided to do an integration test for the DSN sync, and that's basically what it does. It just starts two farmers, one of which is the seeder, which plots like way more data than the syncer, so that we could test like whether we exceeded our range which we intended to sync. Yeah. So basically, we start two farmers and we seed one of these with some like mock data, and after that we try to sync that with like another farmer, and we should see that the sync pieces are actually like they have some properties. So for example, they're in some kind of range which we know in advance. Yeah, I didn't push like some of the changes, but I hope to make the test more certain, and yeah, in general to know some more properties in advance in future. Yeah, but it is what it is right now. The test didn't pass. Yeah, the test didn't pass right now, unfortunately. Yeah, hope to finish that soon. Yeah, and apart from that, I finally landed the PR related to reverse iteration for B3 database for the ParityDB. Yeah, there were some issues related to that because of the internal structure of B3DB. But yeah, overall, party folks are already like put some comments there. We'll fix them soon. Yeah, and also there were some performance issues related to that. But basically, there are like 3 layers for the iteration. Yeah, basically this is the top level structure, which basically has the log, the commit overlay, and just the general iterator. The most interesting part is the commit overlay and the iter backend. Basically, the first one is just the cache, so that we could accumulate some of the changes and put them in a batch to the disk, like in some time later. Yeah, and the iterator basically is just a wrapper around disk things. Yeah, so yeah, and the issue which I discovered here is that yeah, there are different layers basically, and you need to and they also have like some shared state between each other. Yeah, which you need to keep in sync between them. Yeah, hopefully it's now working. It is not excessively tested yet. Yeah, I just didn't had enough time to think about like how it would be easier and fancier to test that. Yeah, hope to spend some time on that this week. Yeah, that's it for my changes as for this week. Yeah, ready to answer your questions.
On that pull request, I just noticed that you had some minor refactoring. You can probably create another pull request with just those to land them sooner. They're like relatively minor.
You're talking about like which exact?
In that request
refactoring?
in ParityDB, you have a few first commits that are just refactoring, from what I understand.
Yeah, but they're kind of minor, I guess.
Yeah, but at the same time, they increase the diff, so maybe we can just land something in between.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Daria.
Yeah, it's me again. So for the first part you had integrating DSN into Farmer, is it to make farmers to be able to sync out of each other, right?
Yep.
And so that
yep.
the
So-
farmer doesn't need to have a node at the same time on same machine, or that's a different part.
It's a different part. So
it's a step towards that.
yes, I mean not entirely. So there are actually several things at play. There is initial sync when you just start for the first time, so you need to pull a lot of data from the network. Then, as network progresses, you need to also observe new pieces and maybe replot some of those that you have. So that part is something that Shamil will explain. And the third part is when you have a challenge every slot, you need to receive the challenge from the node. So for that, you will still need node even when we transition all of the sync mechanisms.
Does the network like know in any way if it's syncing from like a node or another farmer, or am I getting confused here?
I think it's just different API, so it does know, but eventually it wouldn't matter as long as you can request it from the network from somewhere.
Okay. So this kind of should push. So right now it's like one node for one farmer, but eventually it's going to be way more farmers. Or
no, there will be about the same number of nodes, but nodes will not be archival nodes like right now, and maybe not even full nodes. They will be like really, really light. And farmers will store the actual data so they can sync from each other, nodes can sync from them, and so on.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
The initial data that needs to be downloaded, do we need Node for that? Like, wouldn't DSM would solve that issue as well?
For the farmer?
Yeah.
That's what we are working on. That's what the DSN sync is about, initial sync.
Yeah, okay, then I misunderstand, okay.
All right. Thanks, Ivan, for great work. And we transition to Shamil.
Okay. Last week, I worked with PubSub feature for archiving segments for the DSN. I added a common subscription topic using the gossip sub protocol from the P2P library for farmers and nodes in the networking grid. We plan to replace the RPC archiving method in the future, but currently we have them both. We also have a DSN sync testing meeting with Alexei, Ivan, and Nazar. We agreed on this testing in 3 stages. First, in-process unit test by Ivan. Second, local machine test using local Docker Compose configurations for 2 pairs of nodes per farmer setup. I will do that. And the third, we discussed the test with a dedicated network, and we will probably meet online again after the successful first 2 tests to elaborate on the details. I need Ivan's help to start testing locally. We agreed to add or modify 2 CLI flags for farmers, to add disable farming flag and to modify existing sync from DSM flag. Currently, I'm reading a specification for the libp2p circuit relay for my next task. I started doing some initial experiments. It is a networking improvement. Right now, we open a new port for each plot on the farmer side. And with the help of the relay protocol, it's possible to use a single port for that. This week, I plan to just experiment on this and use it in our networking grid. That's it.
Yeah, I was also wondering, I believe there is this kind of development network in libp2p where you don't have actual network, you can just connect several peers like in process. Maybe we can use transport like that for communicating between the peer that has public IP address and the ones that don't, just like to make it faster so we don't have to have listening interface at all on those others. If it's possible.
Whether they have some example of what you're saying?
I think in examples of libp2p Rust, they should have this like dev network. I don't know if it's like in memory or not, but if it is in memory, I think it would be beneficial to not create multiple sockets.
Okay,
for no
please
reason.
share it with me. I will definitely look at it.
Okay, I need to look at it once again, but I
Okay.
believe there is something like that.
Okay, but their relay example is very simple.
Right, relay is separate, I guess. We can
Yes.
still have it, but we can connect peers locally through the in-memory transport and remotely via TCP or whatever it happens to be.
Okay,
we
we can
eventually-
do that also.
Yeah, if it is possible, like I don't know, it should be. I think it should be because it supports multiple transports.
I could try and make some research in that direction too.
Yeah, just like further optimization steps, I guess.
Okay, but if you know that some kind of link to that example, please
Mhm,
share the
mhm.
link. It will be
Okay.
very helpful.
I will. Okay, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm about the node issue again. So after we get the DSM working, the only function of the node will be receiving and sending challenges, right?
Eventually.
Okay.
Also, those nodes that are doing archiving, which are probably those that are running the executor, they will also broadcast newly produced pieces just
Yeah, of
into
course.
DSN.
Yeah, I was talking aside from the archival nodes. Yeah, I get it.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Daria, do you have anything to comment or any questions you would like to discuss?
I want to just came to my mind after listening all of you guys' updates that the spec that you have in Notion, it's mostly written from the farmer perspective, I guess. So there is a plotting phase that is only about farmer. Challenge generation and challenge response is also about farmer. And then there is a part about the verification of the block and of the challenges, and then processing new blocks. Do you recall if those parts are also just like farmer specific, or do they make sense for executor too? Because the document doesn't have anything about the decoupled execution either.
Okay, so there is a little bit of confusion with this
Yeah.
terminology. So there is a node which is of two kinds. There is like consensus node and executor node. Executor node is like an option right now. It might change in the future once we have like domains and stuff. And farmer is like a separate thing. It's not like a farmer node, like it's a farmer application which is connected to the node. So when we are talking about things like challenge generation, it's actually two parts, because we start with the randomness from the protocol, and then we have a slot, and we add that, we have global randomness, and then we like transition the boundary between node and farmer, where we have a farmer generating local challenge for every plot, and then they have a target that they are trying to solve against. So like there is this line which is not described in this specification, but this like process, it transitions from the node to farmer at some point. And then when we are talking about the challenge response, again, it is generated on the farmer, and then it transitions to the node where verification actually happens. I don't know if it would be helpful to like separate those. It's mostly like an implementation detail. You can technically have like a special node which has a farmer embedded into it and stuff like that. Then it will be kind of all the same. But the way we have our architecture right now, there's like this invisible line between them.
Yeah, okay. Maybe it would be a good idea to try to make it kind of clear in the spec, and where those things jump from farmer to node from
Yeah, that like the way it's written, like it's how it should be, and the fact that it is split between like two applications is kind of implementation detail. We don't mention anything about RPC there, for instance, but it is there. However, in case of desktop application, it will not be RPC eventually. We'll just connect to like a channel or some kind of callback directly within application. We will disable RPC server entirely. So again, it's this implementation detail. It can be done different ways, but specification just explains what the workflow is like, what are the steps required to make it happen.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to, I guess, later after I finish going through the spec and comparing it with code, maybe meet and go through all of this notes that I have taken, and to clarify which ones of those are worth including, which ones of those are details of implementation, so on and so forth, and which ones are actually worth being corrected. And
yeah, I think most of the things that you find like confusing or things that you would have found helpful if they were there should probably be included. So
I mean, there are a few confusing things, like for instance, record size, witness size, piece size are measured in bytes, but then max plot size is measured in pieces.
Yes. Yes.
And it's not a very good conventional naming. Should be max plot pieces, I guess. And so some of the formulas in the spec, I have hard time understanding whether they're measured in bytes or in pieces, or so that's kind of a persisting throughout the whole spec.
Yeah, I'm getting confused about that all the time.
We're getting the same issues like on the code side also.
So maybe there should be like a convention of what things are measured and like naming convention. Like if it's size, it should be bytes.
On the raw side, we can at least like
should be
make some wrapper
pieces.
types and like make a type measured not in bytes but in like pieces. But if you have like a better name suggestion that would be like appropriate, please do suggest and tag like me and Ivan. We'll probably want to change that in the code because
I mean, what I used to do where something was measured in bytes, the name was bytes, like blah blah bytes.
So the challenge there, like why it's in pieces, I guess, is not all number of bytes in bytes are actually valid. There should be multiple of piece size.
No, yeah, I'm just saying that when something is a multiple of piece size, it should not have the same naming convention as something that is not measured in pieces.
Maybe.
Like it kind of should be clear from the name whether something is measured, because also in the code, in several places you have max plot size, and then you have max plot pieces, which I kind of assume I am measuring the same thing. So
may not be the case.
Yeah.
Actually.
It's like, it sounds cumbersome if you like add just bytes. It's like max plot size bytes.
Well, max plot bytes and max plot pieces should be two separate things measured in different things.
It's kind of like this old
Maybe you don't need max
Visual
plot
style
bytes at
where you
all.
like prefix variables with M or V or something, depends on like the type, like I if it's an integer.
Hungarian notation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
probably. It's also suboptimal in some cases, but in this case it's probably worth it because it's really confusing sometimes.
At least on Rust side we can add type wrappers for sure.
Yeah, we can just add a type wrapper and forget about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of already forget about that. Like we get used to it, but thanks for the look for the outside that it is actually a problem and everyone agrees with that. All right. Vlad, Ozgan, Alexei, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Nothing on infrastructure side. There's a PR again. That's pretty much it. And the line changes that I've added. Those are the two things that I would like for you guys to have a look at it over this week and get some feedback around it and iterate on top of it.
Okay.
I'm here to hear the farmer changes. That's all.
And as for me, maybe we should set up something like CI/CD for hotfixes. For example, if we see there is a bug, maybe we should create hotfix branch. But I guess we'll discuss it in the Let's PR, so that we might have a different workflows and different CI/CD process if we see something like this.
Okay. Okay, let me share my updates this time. This should be it. I think you can see it, right? So this was a simple pull request, just switch from Merkle tree branch from upstream into the release because it was finally released. Then there was a sloth library update, which basically checks. There was one platform, Clover OpenCL platform on Linux, that we were excluding in case it's an AMD GPU because it didn't support some of the features, but that was like a workaround. The proper fix was actually to check whether the OpenCL implementation is not just GPU, AMD, Intel, NVIDIA, but also has a version of at least OpenCL 2. So the new version has changed that, and that fixes some of the errors that people have seen. They will just not try to use OpenCL in the first place. It wasn't included in the last snapshot because it was before that. The next snapshot will include this change. Then there was update of the Reed-Solomon ratio library. There was a contribution from one of the open source developers that fixed some of the things related to cross compilation. And I believe that is required for the pull request, where we've added #64 binaries for macOS. So in our CI pipeline, where we build snapshots, we have a little bit changed structure where we define targets. So in addition to the operating system on which we are building, we'll also specify the target for which we are building. In case of macOS, can be either Apple Darwin on x86-64 or AH64, and corresponding changes across the board. But generally, it works, and it seems to be doing well. So that's for M1 native builds. Then there was Substrate upgrade. Nothing fancy. There were some fixes, some new features. One of those features actually allowed to create this pull request in which we are disabling RogueDB in our builds. So mostly the changes are to the cargo toml, where we disable default features which include RogueDB, and that allows us to get rid of it. But also there is a small test in here that checks for the available databases. The first item here is RogueDB when it's enabled. So we'll just make sure that whatever feature unification happens, we do not have it enabled. It's very easy to add dependencies somewhere and forget to add default features false and get RogueDB suddenly enabled again. So that's why there is this test. No other changes necessary here. And there was a pull request after that to remove RogueDB. No, this is not this one. This one. There was a hack we added to make sure that ParityDB is always used like this. We were just going into database parameters and replacing whatever database was selected with ParityDB unconditionally. That is no longer the case. It's no longer necessary once we have that test, because if you don't have RogueDB, it will default to ParityDB. So we can just remove those hacks from here. Then I don't remember what this is. Yeah, just upgrade for CI, for operating systems, and start building by default on macOS 12. There is really no reason to build on the older one. I tried to actually upgrade our Docker files, but I couldn't because the glibc is problematic if you are starting with 2204. It doesn't run on 2004 because the glibc version there is old. But I did miss CMake from the Substrate upgrade because there was a Prost library in dependencies. It was using some C library, which I believe was pre-built, and now they're building it from scratch. So that's why they need CMake all of a sudden. That's why I had to fix these things. And I've updated documentation to mention that CMake is also necessary. Then I was looking into fixing a bunch of our tickets on GitHub. One of them was to add documentation for OpenCL, what needs to happen and like where to find it. It basically points to our sloth library. There is a section that's well written about what needs to be installed. And here we have, I was looking into, this was the old ticket, but there's a bigger ticket about switching our test framework for a C consensus subspace so we can actually test things. But that is the code that we inherited from Substrate. And it was including this Aura, Babe, and Grandpa pieces in different places. So I basically started with that to just remove all of that legacy. Just like 400 lines of unnecessary code here. Nothing really fancy. Then I observed that in the node, there is just this new method that we have in the codec, where you just call it, and it will try to identify whether GPU is supported or not, and it will try to initialize GPU and stuff like that. However, in many cases in the node, we are just using codec for verification, which means that we have a new block, and we need to verify whether the solution is correct. But for that, we will initialize GPU for no reason, basically. So I have separated this API to add a new method, newbie GPU. So regular new will not initialize GPU anymore. However, newbie GPU will try to do that if possible. And we only use that in the farmer. We don't use that in the node anywhere. And then in the solve, we need the codec. We just have this method modified, where it's always none for the OpenCL encoder. And yes, it's GPU. It's basically what it was before, the old version of the new method. This will ensure that we don't have any errors in logs, and we don't even try to use GPU on the node because it's kind of useless. It wasn't enabled, by the way, in the node in dependencies. However, due to the way Cargo unifies features, when we build node and farm at the same time with one command, we do have this effect, and it gets enabled. So that's why. And there was this last pull request about single plot farm that I mentioned on the DevSync, I think. This is like the first step. We have this new abstraction we have in here. It's basically a simple struct for now, and it has some fields related to that particular piece of space on the disk. And you can create it, and you can scroll is broken in Firefox. Yeah, it's really hard to read this way. Sorry about that. And there is another method, I believe, to call GSN sync. But the idea is to encapsulate all of the methods, all of the stuff for creation and maintenance of the single plot, and then create abstraction for multiple plots on top of that, and on top of that, to have the farmer itself. Right now, this is directly below the multi-farming, but eventually, multi-plot farm will be there. Yeah, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense where it comes from. And yeah, I've been pushing some changes, discussing some things upstream in the peer-to-peer and Substrate. There were some comments on the networking pull request in Substrate, and we have discussion in the peer-to-peer, but otherwise it seems to be progressing, and I hope in a week or two we will get those merged. Otherwise, yeah, we'll continue working on the farmer. There is a lot of work to be done to improve things. Questions, comments to me, guys?
So in that PR you did by a single plot, there is max plot pieces, but that's relative to the plot, not to the network.
Yes. It's already like, so when you specify, there are two parameters. One is like max plot size from the protocol, and there is another parameter where you specify, I want to use this disk, and I want to occupy at most this much space. And then it figures out how many plots it can have and what size those plots should be. So like plot can be artificially limited below 100 gigabytes, and that is the parameter.
Okay.
All right, I think that's it. Unless you have anything you'd like to discuss on top of that. No? Okay. Thanks everyone for watching on YouTube, and we'll see you next week. Bye.